everybody, it's Nettie Kaye. Welcome back to my studio and to part 2 of painting 3 oranges in a cream colored bowl with a silver pitcher on a blue tablecloth. Woo! That's a mouthful. Today we are going to do the second layer, and this layer actually had time enough to pretty much dry. Oops, maybe not in some of the whites, but it's pretty much dry underneath. So often on your second layer, make sure if you want your paints to kind of go smoothly, put kind of a layer of linseed oil over the top, just really thin, and it'll move a little bit more smoothly. If you don't, you can always add a little bit of medium, which I use a Neo Magyar medium, and but you can use anything that you really prefer. Feel free to ask me about those kind of things in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. All right, so here's where we got to from part 1, and if you haven't watched that one, go back and watch part 1. All right, everybody else did. Okay, so and we just got it kind of loosely started. All right, some of our colors that we're using right now are the I'm going to use the cadmium orange, and this is not the transparent color that I use in a lot of my paintings. It's a really thick cadmium orange that is not transparent. It's opaque. The word opaque is kind of an interesting word, isn't it? That means you just can't see through it. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white to my orange and some Hansa yellow just to brighten it up. Watch this. Now I'm going to come down here and look at that. Oh my goodness. Now I'm going to begin to put in some of the lights into our orange so it just brightens it up. You have to start with a little bit of a duller color. I know it didn't seem dull, but you have to start with a duller color so that your lights will show up when you put them on. If you start really bright, or as bright as you're going to go, you don't have anywhere to go. You're stuck. You have nowhere to go. So you start a little bit duller, and then you add your lights by, well, with this one I didn't put just white in, but I added Hansa yellow. And you can add all kinds of different yellows. And then I look very carefully at my setup over here. And we'll kind of go back and forth with the picture of the picture of the picture. Yeah, English language is a little bit challenging sometimes. And you can see, you can really tell there's a huge difference. I'm going to see if that's in the reflection a little bit. Maybe just a little. Yeah, right there. And some right up in here. So I'm adding that to this. So much of the picture, the pouring vase, is really just a reflection of what's around it, all right? So sometimes that gets a little bit challenging. What you do, it's like transparent glass. You don't really see the glass, do you? You see the highlights. This time, on a reflective surface, you only see pretty much what's around it. That's just reflected in an interesting way right up into it. All right, now I've gone back to just some straight cadmium orange, and I'm moving the cadmium orange next to that really light spot, or the lights on there, and I'm going to transition it into the darker part of the orange. Now, how do I get even higher than that? On my highlight of the orange, because I can see that. Well, you know what, I'm going to add a little bit of, this is odd, I know, Viridian, which is a greenish, bluish greenish thing, okay? And I'm going to add, I'm going to do a ton of white, mostly white, with a little bit of that green color. And it just is a little bit of an opposite effect so that you can see it. And so I'll put that over here. Wow! That's exciting. And I'm going to make a couple of dots of the Viridian and white to pull up that highlight where I see it. A little bit more over here. Maybe there's a tiny bit on top of that one and a little bit right here. And I'm just blotting it in there with the corner of a bright brush. And then I'll wipe off my brush, and then I'll take just a little tiny bit of my brush and try to develop that texture just a little bit further by putting little dots on it with that. So there's a center part of the highlight and then it diminishes as it goes out from that center part. And sometimes we have to do what Helen Van Lyck used to say all the time: make it, break it, and make it again. So what does that mean? Well, I just made it, and then I broke it down a little bit, and then I go right back in, and I put the highlight back in one more time in the very center. And I might do that several times until I get just exactly what I want. So here we go. I'm going to do that a little bit more over here. This one doesn't have quite as much of a distinct highlight, so I'm going to mute it down just a little bit by blending it in to the wet paint below. All right, now that's starting to come out quite a bit. Now I see this rim right underneath. Well, you know what? If this orange is sitting on that rim, it's going to have a little sense of a little bit of a shadow. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take that Viridian green, Viridian, I don't even want to call it Viridian green, Viridian color, which is the greenish color, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of a violet color and put a little white. Now, at some point, guys, we're going to get a second camera. I'm hoping very, very soon, and we're going to be able to show you a little bit more of what's happening on the palette. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yes, it would. All right. So this is just a slight shadow color underneath here. It's almost like just a vibrant violet in a way. It's similar to what's happening down here. And I can warm that up a little bit with a little bit of, let me see, what am I going to do? I'm going to take a little Naples yellow, because that'll be where the thing goes. And I have to watch out so it doesn't turn green. Just a little bit of that Naples yellow. That's better. Okay, that's kind of what I'm seeing. You have to squint your eyes a lot, you know, and then try to figure out, what am I really looking at, you know? What am I really seeing? If I were to take a little piece of paper or a card with a hole cut out in it, and I held it up over what I'm looking at and isolated that little tiny spot, I can figure out, what color is that? You have a better shot at it. All right, let me just grab some fresh paper towels. And I go through a lot of paper towels. Whew. My dad, when he paints, he says he goes through an entire roll of paper towels every time he paints. That's a little bit wild, isn't it? Okay, now I'm going to go back to my Hansa Yellow Deep. Now this is a really intense color, and then I'm adding a huge amount of white to it to start with. Okay, and then I'm going to brighten this up as it comes around a little bit, and that's really starting to lighten up the edge of the bowl, or the lip of the bowl, like that. And then it'll come around and cut through that orange. And then as it kind of goes around the corner, it's going to diminish in color. But I'm going to put it out light, and then I'll darken it down a little bit. And I see that with a little bit of, actually I'm going to take the white with a little bit of Viridian now, and come down into here. That is a glowing color here. This has got a wide lip on the bowl. Really an interesting bowl. Okay, now this is obviously really too bright, so we'll go back into that lavender with the Viridian again, and I'm going to create a bit of a reduced tonal value as it comes out. I want it even darker because it's right underneath that orange. I'll put that shadow in right there. And then it moves out a little bit. Now that's starting to come out a little bit. Okay, let's put a tiny bit of orange with that, and I'm going to come down into the bowl. The bowl is a shiny, kind of a shiny ceramic. There. Now there's a light bluish color, so we'll put some. Do you remember when we did the cloth? We did it with ultramarine blue and white. And so I'm going to take a little bit of that now, because this is sitting on the cloth, and I'm going to come back in and reflect that into the little bowl down like this. I don't want it too much because it is going to be a little bit in the dark area. And then while I've got that on my brush, I'll just clean my brush off and do the drapes. Woo, yeah. All right. Now I want a shadow color, so I'm going to go with some cobalt violet right now. And again, a little bit of viridian. And then we go back in here and emphasize that. This is the violet with cobalt violet with viridian. Sorry about that. So we're shaping it out, shaping out the shadow and restating the shadow. I know that fabric is going to come back up over the top of that, which will help the feeling that it's sitting down in something. You got to watch out that you don't, just isolate things and have them sticking out without having them in context. So let's see where else I can throw this before I put this paint away. All right, I'm going to go back in. Ooh, I like this. Violet with viridian. That's some of my favorite shadow colors, everybody. Violet or a purple with a viridian color. Now, we're going to go back in with the ultramarine blue, add a little bit of ultramarine blue to our brush, which already had the shadow parts on it, and it just really makes this shadow look like it's just very rich in its color. While I have a little bit of the violet with the viridian going, let's isolate this. This actually hits the cloth right here, so I'm going to give it kind of a parting line, and I want to darken up this a little bit. Okay, where else? Oh, underneath, same thing, underneath the lip, kind of casts a little bit of a shadow there. A little bit tricky, a little tricky. Now, this feels really bright. It just like in your face. Okay, so I'm gonna now I'm gonna wipe off my brush a little bit, and then I'm going to just kind of fuzz it out a little bit and just mute it down by mixing the colors a little bit together. And also, when something is going back into space that's round especially, it can't have a sharp edge, everybody. If it has a sharp edge, it looks like it's like a paper doll bowl, all right? It looks like it's been cut out of paper. So you want to make sure that the edges around, like even around this orange right here, are soft as they go back into space. If they're not, then they look like they're just made out of cardboard and you've glued them on. So make sure that you soften them up. Sometimes I can do it with a Q-tip, all right? I teach that to my little kids. I'll take a little Q-tip and then just make little tiny circles around the edge of something, and it makes it much nicer. I'm going to do something just a little bit weird now. I'm going to test out a phthalo blue, just to make it interesting. And I'm going to put a lot of medium in here. Phthalo blue and white. And I'm going to see what happens if I hit that, let's see, in maybe some of the lights. Yes, I love that. Okay, phthalo blue is a little more greenish. It's got a little more of a green color to it, and if I add it to white, then it contrasts a little bit with the ultramarine blue, which is a more of a straight, middle of the road blue. Isn't that pretty? All right, so any of my highlights now, I'm going to come back in on the fabric with the phthalo blue and white. You gotta be careful not to just try, all of a sudden you can catch yourself with a really teeny tiny brush working your way around, and it's, oh my goodness, you can spend days on a spot and not realize that you've really wasted a day because you've used too small a brush. I do that every once in a while. I'll catch myself and it's like, oh shoot, I could have gotten this done hours ago if I had just grabbed a bigger brush, especially for the larger areas where you're just kind of filling in a little more of that light color. Again, we're just making this into an Impressionist type of a feel. Let's get this over here. As it comes up to there, and then I also want to make it feel as though it's moving and catching this guy over on the other side. So a little bit milder there, and then it gets brighter. The brightest area that I'm seeing is right about in here. It's nice and bright, and then it sinks in a little bit. Should fluff it up a little. One thing I should do is hire somebody to come into my studio and tell me to stop when the painting's done so that I don't just pick it to death. We do tend to get to that point where we just think, oh, we got to make every little thing look, really tight. And you don't want to do that. If that's what you're trying to accomplish, if you're trying to be loose, keep it loose all over. And can you see how I'm working this now? If you watched the last video, you'll know I'm trying to work the whole thing over at one time so that I don't overwork one small area. Again, everyone, don't work one small area over to the point of no return, and then you feel forced into making all the rest of the areas really, really tight as well. So you start really loose. You start with, you start with a broom, you end with a needle, and so you can stop at any point. I could stop right here and sign this and say that's done if I wanted to. It's not done as far as, what I'm trying to accomplish, but it could be if I wanted to, as long as I keep everything in the same, kind of the same level as I'm moving up. At some point, then I can just stop and say, oh, I'm happy with that. And you can get it all the way up to teeny tiny details, fleas on a dog. Remember our Drapery song from last time? Dark, and then we go middle tone, and light, then middle tone, then dark. So I'll start with this. All right, let's see if I'm just going to do an exaggeration of that. This is the dark cast shadow of the fold right there, okay? And I can put that in various different places. The next thing up is going to be somewhere in the middle. So I'll put that next to it. I'll put a middle tone right next to that. See how that looks so soft and it moves into the middle. And then I go with a light, and then a middle tone back down, and then I can make that down into the darks again. So dark, middle tone, light, middle tone, dark. And then I can, if I want, I can make a highlight in the middle of that. If I want it to look really shiny, I can, add a really light highlight right there. I like that. I just put a yellow highlight on it, and that sort of works. So I'm going to do that one more time in the area that I want to kind of stand out a little ways. So where the darkest dark meets the lightest light at the sharpest edge is generally where your focus lands, all right? So the darkest dark meeting the lightest light at the sharpest edge. So I'm going to use this bowl, the edge of this bowl, as kind of my focal point right here. And so you ask yourself that, say, okay, where's the darkest dark meet the lightest light at the sharpest edge? And wherever you want the viewer to look, that's where you put that. You put that darkest dark meeting the lightest light at the sharpest edge. And so I'm going to continue with that right here so that this orange becomes part of that whole process right there, the bottom of the dish. Okay, I'm going to blend it together a little bit. There's a little bit of light right here in the middle of the bowl where these two oranges kind of share are just kind of split. So I want to emphasize that a little bit so that you can see how that just pops out like that. I got to make this a little bit darker right here because I want the fabric to stand out. And it's what I'm seeing right here. And here's the handle with that same color. An odd gray. We should do a show on grays, except for no one would watch it. Great. It takes a huge amount of concentration, everybody, so just a tremendous amount of looking. And then you can, the more you look, the more you see. Duh, a little bit of a light there. If you put too much light on it, then it just loses its power, all right? The highlights lose their power if you put too much on. Okay, so now this part of the pot, we're going to go in with that really dark Viridian with violet color with, and then we've got to make it push back into space. So I need to make sure that that's nice and established. Otherwise it just disappears. You can't even see it. Now up at the top, let's do the same mixture of the violet, viridian, and raw sienna. And we're going to cut that in. I'm going to use some medium on that. Now see how wide that highlight is. Now is when I can come in with my little brush and I can cut it down to where it's just paper thin. That's not a problem. And then this, because it's the light's coming from over here, is going to be dark as it goes in around on this side. So the light comes, it hits the edge of the pot right here, and then it comes out over here. We'll pick it up here and go like this. I think it needs to be just a little bit onto here. Wipe off my brush, add a little bit more of the light color right here. This is going to be white on the brush, and then I'll drag it down into curvature of the pot. And then I'm going to give it a highlight. There. That's pretty. Light purple. Violet with white. You can see that now. Up against that highlight right there. A little bit of violet with white. And then on either side of the highlight, you put that. It just makes it look great. Violet. See, I don't want to end up with a highlight on the very edge of the fabric. It has to go back into space, so you're not going to have just a highlight on the edge of that fabric. Otherwise, it will, again, look like a paper cutout. So you just give it a little bit of a medium or middle tone right there. Put the highlight right next to it, like right here. All right, not right on the edge. Just kind of make it a little bit brighter there. I'm going to step back for a moment and take a look at it and decide on a few little things like the background color, and I'll be right back. Okay, stood back and I took a look at it. I'm liking the way it's going, and I kind of like that purple background, don't you? I might mute it down a little bit. I'm not really sure. I'm going to piddle around with it, and then we'll see how it turns out. I think one of the things I need to do is make sure that there's enough contrast between here and the background that you can see the handle. And so I'll work on that. And then I've got to make this a little bit cleaner. The background, when you rub it in a little bit, sometimes it just looks a little bit gnarly. So I'm going to put an extra layer of paint on it. And I'm going to do a few more things, and I'll show you how it all turns out in just a moment. Well, you guys, it's been a couple of days, and I've finally realized that on my road to creating a loose impressionistic style painting, I have once again deviated off into the road of realism. I wonder if I'll ever succeed. How does that happen? Well, what happens is you don't put the brush down when you need to. You need somebody in the room to say, stop, it looks good, just leave it alone. And what happens is I begin to see more and more details that I want to bring out, and then I want to shine it up a little bit and soften down an edge here and there, and then you stand back and you go, oh, another realistic painting, great. It's beautiful, yes, but it's not Impressionism. So if you'd like to stay on this journey with me and find out if we ever are going to be able to get to this point of being able to paint impressionistically, make sure you subscribe. And meanwhile, I'm going to add one more element to this pretty painting. I'm going to add a little teacup right here, and I'll do a little mini video on that. And so we'll do one more realistic painting of that to finish this one off. And then I'll put it on my Etsy site up for sale. For all of you who love realism in your paintings, that one will become available. Hey, thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.